Hello everyone, greetings from PayTap's technical support team. In this series, you will learn how to integrate with PayTaps through our PT2 API's endpoints. And we will walk you through the first integration type, which is the PayTaps hosted payment page. For the purpose of this series, we have created a very simple Laravel project to walk you through the integration process. But feel free to follow the steps in this series with your own project, whatever the programming language or the frameworks used to integrate with PayTapps. So, let's get started. In this video, we are going to learn more about the payment workflow for the hosted payment page integration type, and we are also going to learn more about some of the basic components that we are going to use throughout the tutorial. Something like the project structure that we are going to use, maybe get to know about the request payload that you are going to send to PayTabs, and some key components like this. So let's move forward. The first thing you should know is that you can find the full documentation for this step inside PayTab's support portal under the article called the Hosted Payment Page API's Integration Manual. And now, let's move to the first part. As we said, the first part we want to learn more about is the payment workflow. So if you actually navigated to step 3 over here, you will find that we have a part for the payment workflow where you can find a solution article describing the payment workflow for the hosted payment page APIs. So let's learn more about it. Now, the workflow is very simple. Let's learn more about it or take a bigger look at it inside the Postman application to be more clear and to understand it more. So simply what is happening is you are sending a request to PayTap's server. After this request is authenticated successfully, you will receive a response that contains a redirect URL that looks like this. We will learn more about this request parameters and this response parameters, the differences between them, how we can use them in the next couple of videos. For now, we just want to learn more about the workflow itself. So, as we were saying, we are just sending a request that looks like this to PayTabs server. After it's authenticated successfully, PayTabs will respond to you with a response that looked like this and had this parameter that is called redirect URL. You can then use this redirect URL and redirect your customer to it. So if we take a look at this redirect URL over here and open it like this, you will see that it had the payment page or the hosted payment page. So once your customer is redirected to this hosted payment page, he will be able to fulfill the payment, enter his payment details, and once he finishes the payment, he will be able, or PayTaps actually, will redirect him back or redirect her back to your website. And inside this redirection, what we are going to learn more about in the future, we or you will actually receive the transaction details along with this redirection. So, this is the simple payment workflow we are going to use and we are going to integrate throughout this tutorial, but instead of using it with our Postman directly, we are going to implement it inside a very simple Laravel project. Now, before we get into the structure of this project and how we are going to send the request payload that we just saw in the previous payment workflow with this project, let's first take a look and or at the final behavior or the final result that we want to receive. So simply you will be having something like this. You have a checkout page which contains the card details, maybe containing the customer details only, maybe containing also the shipping details, but normally you have a simple checkout page that you want your customer to fill it, finalize it, and then redirect him to the payment page. So by simply fulfilling this customer details and choosing PayTabs, what we want to have here is to send the request that we just saw and to get the customer to be redirected like this. Once clicking on submit, he will be redirected to the payment page, fulfill his payment, something that looks like this. And after clicking on pay now, we want him of course to be redirected back to our website. This is the simple workflow or the simple thing that we want to accomplish. And we will learn in the next couple of videos how to do that in details. But for now, let's take a look at the project structure that we are going to use throughout this tutorial. Now, as we clarified before, we are using a very simple Laravel project to accomplish this goal. So here what is happening is you can see the different classes that we are going to use, how we, of course, we use the MVC design pattern to implement this integration. So here you can see that the first step or the first class that we are going to go through is the payment controller. So once the customer click the submit button and send the request gets passed or gets sent to our controller over here, and we have a very simple function over here in the controller which is called initiate a hosted payment page. Now, the first thing that happens simply the controller receives the request is passed through this function. Of course, first it will be validated. So we have done the validation step inside a request validation class over here where we put all our validation. Sometimes you will need to validate the customer details, sometimes you will need to validate also the shipping details, and we are going to discuss more about that in the videos related. But for now, we are just validating the cart details, which is the required parameters, and we are also validating the customer details, and we are setting the boundaries for them, what is required and which type of them, and all of these stuff inside this validator. Now, once the request is validated and get into this function actually inside the controller, it will be sent to the next class in our hierarchy, which is the payment repository. Now, we are passing this parameter to the payment repository in order to create the payment workflow. So, if we move forward to the payment repository over here, we will see that it's a very simple class. All what we are doing here is we are receiving the request details, we are generating the request generating the request payload using our data wrapper. We will get into this data wrapper lately, but first, after finalizing the request payload inside the data wrapper, and now we have a ready request payload, we will be converting it to array and then sending it using our client, which in this case will be the Gazelle client, and we will learn more about it. So let's take a look at this data wrapper and see how we are using this class to generate the request payload. So what we need to do here is we want to finalize a request payload that looks something like this. So if you see here inside the code, we have this data wrapper that is responsible for doing that. So simply this data wrapper will be creating the customer details, will be generating the shipping details, all the details you wanted. For example, here we have a function for generating the customer details from the request, generating the shipping details from the request, and all other details. Finally, after generating all these details, it will be generating the full payload. Now, in the next video, we'll learn more about these parameters, but for now, what we want to know that the data wrapper is responsible for generating the payload, generating the payload inside the payload or something like that, and after that, returning back to the repository. So by now, we have generated the request payload, we have used the data wrapper class to generate this payload, and we have converted to array to be ready to use, and all what we need to do now is to send it to the PayTap server. So for that, we will be using the client called Gazelle inside this trait called send request trait. Now, if we get redirected to this trait over here, you will see that this is a simple trait or simple client that we are using to send the request. We are getting some of the basic details, like for example the domain, the endpoint, and this details is configured somewhere inside the environment and the configuration file. And once this detail is ready, we finalize the request payload and send it to PayTap server, and PayTap server then receive us with a JSON response that we redirected back to the controller, and in return the controller do the redirection for the hosted payment page, or if we have an exception or some error, the redirection will be to an error page that contain or receive this error to be received and to be displayed to the customer, or to be, for example, managed by your side to display a certain message that you want to display. Now, by now, I know that there may be some, let's say, much details for you to understand or to gather, but don't worry, we are just taking the first look, we are just learning about the structure. In the next couple of videos, we will learn more about we will learn more about the request payload in detail and how we are generating it here and how we are sending it, the endpoint that we are using to send, the required parameter, the authentication or the API's keys. All of these details will be clarified in the next couple of videos. We just wanted to take a look at the payment workflow and the general structure of the project we are using, and take a simple look about the request and the response we are using. So by now, you should just know that for this project, of course, we are using Laravel version 10. We are using the Gazelle client to send the request, the latest version of the Gazelle client that you can use inside Laravel. Of course, you can use any client you want to send the request in the end, but by now we just sent the request finally, we received the response and redirected the customer to the redirect URL inside the request. And of course, we will be learning how we are going to handle the errors if any of them appeared or any of them were sent from PayTap side, and show it at your side, or maybe, as we said, display a certain message. So let's move to the next video and learn more about the request parameter in details.